Singapore has been ranked the most peaceful country in Asia. The annual Global Peace Index reveals that the country has the lowest fear of violence in the world. Less than 5% of Singaporeans report being very worried of becoming victim to violent crime. Singapore is also poised to be one of the countries most ready for a COVID-19 recovery. And this comes even as the index shows a 0.07% dip in average peace levels worldwide, the ninth time it deteriorated in the last 12 years. The study also finds that most forms of violence have returned to pre-COVID levels, even though they fell in the early stages of the pandemic. Meanwhile, Iceland remains the most peaceful country in the world. Japan is the second highest ranking country in Asia in 12th place, one spot behind Singapore. The index ranks peace levels across 163 independent states and territories, tracking conflicts and influencing factors. And for a closer look, we're joined now by one of the contributors to the index, Michael Collins. He's from the Institute for Economics and Peace. Mr. Collins, what are the key factors driving this global downward trend in peace levels, and how much of an effect did COVID-19 have over the past year?
Hi, Dawn. So, yeah, I mean, you mentioned, very briefly, sort of the very small decline in peacefulness that the globe has seen this year, and the fact that it's kind of sort of part of a broader trend in deteriorations over the last decade as well. However, it is the smallest deterioration on the index that we've ever seen. There have been a number of improvements. For example, the number and the deaths related to internal conflict, and there's been an improvement or a decrease, should I say, in the impact of terrorism, which is sort of part of a longer trend as well. But, a number of deteriorations related to violent demonstrations and political instability, as well as an increase in militarization, which is also part of a sort of a trend that has actually reversed in the last couple of years. So we've seen over 15,000 violent demonstrations or strikes or riots essentially around the world. Some of those were related to COVID, some not, and the factors vary greatly around the world as well, from protests or violent protests related to the Black Lives Matter movement, to election results, to agricultural reform in India, for example, or economic policy reform in Latin America. In terms of COVID specifically, it has had a significant impact on peacefulness, and that's sort of both positive and negative. So you mentioned sort of briefly the internal conflict dynamics and the reduction in homicides and violent crime. And yes, you're right, that is kind of sort of very temporary in nature. In fact, we have sort of seen those spikes again immediately as countries have sort of come out of lockdown. There's been deteriorations in domestic violence and an increase in civil unrest and political instability as well. So out of those 15,000 events that I mentioned, 5,000 are exclusively related to COVID. And, of course, although some parts of the world are coming out of COVID right now, it's by no means over. Data is still coming in. And there are still impacts related to the ongoing lockdowns, as well as potential impacts in the future related to the economic recovery.
Now, Singapore is top in Asia and 11 worldwide. What kind of signal does that send to the rest of the region in terms of its economy and social stability?
So, I mean, Singapore fares very well, not only regionally as top in the region, but also globally, of course. It ranks kind of sort of in the middle of the index with regards to militarization, but, Singapore really enjoys high levels of societal safety and security, as well as kind of sort of low levels of external or internal conflict. And Dawn, you mentioned briefly some of the results from the partnership that we have with Lloyd's Register and the World Risk Poll about Singaporean citizens reporting some of the lowest levels of not only experiencing violence but also fear of violence as well. In fact, the least in the world, as you mentioned too. I think sort of the combination of all of these things are really sort of things that other countries, not only regionally and globally, can look up to, for sure, acknowledging that, of course, the context vary and so do the challenges.
Well, turning the focus to the wider Asian region, Mr. Collins, how would you rate its performance overall?
So the Asia Pacific region, it's had a slight fall in peacefulness over the last year, although it continues to be the third most peaceful region globally. So 10 countries improved and 9 deteriorated. There's been ongoing reductions in the impact of terrorism. There's been reductions in military expenditure and levels of militarization within the region. Vietnam was one of the largest improvers, both are also related to military, to reductions in military expenditure as well. Some of the deteriorations related to internal conflict and violent demonstrations. Once again, a combination of COVID and other things. For example, one of the largest deteriorations was in fact in Myanmar, which is the least peaceful country in the region. The impact of violence continues to sort of be an issue. It's one of the regions that has one of the largest sort of impact. The economic cost of violence is the largest. That's currently 3.3 trillion, an increase last year too.
Mr. Collins, thank you very much for shedding light on those statistics and those rankings. That was Michael Collins there from the Institute for Economics and Peace.